Good day, everyone. I am James Anthony J. Baybay, taking up Bachelor of Science in Criminology in the beautiful city of Negros Oriental, Dumaguete City. I'm currently in Negros Oriental State University. So guys, how was your day? Did you watch my discussion videos? I hope you learn and understand something. Well, if you really understand my discussions, it is good to hear because you will be able to gain knowledge on how important in studying institutional corrections, especially if you are a criminology student. And now, for this fourth video, you will be able to have and gain more knowledge and ideas on how of the institutional corrections have been introduced or given progression to this modernity. So first, we will tackle the offenders and their treatment. So here, we will be able to know of what will be the following procedures and treatment of the offenders and how will they give rule inside to the prison. It is very important to know this following process in order for us to have the idea of what kind of life if you were inside the prison. Because these prisoners is still a person or a human being, but only the difference is they have committed a violent actions that resulted them to put into jail. But we should not take them as another person or another kind of human because they are put into jails or prison in order to be rehabilitated or given improvements on their psychological problems and probably to their mental problems, because some also committed criminal acts because of this kind of problems, especially if that particular person were under poverty, and in order for that particular person to provide the needs of his family and is to do such criminal act like snatching or hold-upping. It is a violence way, especially in a public places, because it made the community into danger and it shows lack of peace and order, and that particular situation will really affect every human's needs and their kind of or way of living they have in a certain community. So here, let's proceed to the offenders and treatment. A considerable debate has developed about whether treatment programs work and to what extent. Careful reviews of the literature on rehabilitation have concluded that treatment does reduce recidivism. No single type of treatment or rehabilitation program, however, works for every offender. The effectiveness of programs depends on many things, including type of offense. So when someone will be put into prison, his punishment or kind of rehabilitation will depend on how or what kind of crime that particular person has committed, because there are categories of crime. The quality of the program and the family, church, and community support. So in relation with this, in order to be an imprisonment to be effective, it should be included or collaborated, including with the community support, as well as the government supporting this kind of implementation, because they are once the source of this kind of implementation, because the government provides this kind of process in order to provide an effective and clean, healthy, as well as peace and order community. Even if that particular government have encountered lapses, but still they are still making some ways and many more in order to obtain the efficiency and to continue and have its improvements and changes of implementing this kind of rehabilitation. But let us not just focus to this kind of problem. Let us be general that there are still many problems that our country are facing on. That's why we should not judge each one of us to their leadership, because we have different perspectives and ways on how we could solve and give its solution from the following problems that comes to ourselves. So one area of criminal activity that seems to respond to treatment is substance abuse. So in this rehabilitation and treatment to the offender, some officials have shown their abuse of power because they are having these abusive actions like harassment to some prisoners, especially if that particular prisoner have committed by a very serious and violent criminal act. So more is being learned about how substance abuse and crime are linked in the United States. Not only in the United States, but all over the countries that are having this kind of implementation, the rehabilitation. This also linked in our country, Philippines, that some of the jail officials has been harassed and abusive to their powers. But still, nowadays, there are also continuing this practice. And according to the National Institute of Justice report, at the time of their arrest, 2/3 of adults and half of juveniles tested positive for at least one drug. Recent nationwide studies have concluded that drug treatment is reducing drug use, criminal activity, and physical and mental problems, as well as increasing employment potential. So what I have said, that this particular mental health problem will link a particular person to do such criminal act. So in this particular situation, because of lack of amount of money or lack of power, it has become a problem, especially to the poor people, because they only have limitation on how they provide and give efficient to the community. It is very important to help and provide to those poor individuals in order for this implementation of having a peace and order community to be effective by helping each one of us. We should not always be selfish and provide and give. If you can give, then provide. The next will be the human life and dignity. So it is very important to every human being to have its dignity to his personal attitude and characteristics. So the fundamental starting point for all of Catholic social teaching is the defense of human life and dignity. In relation with this, the Roman Catholic Church and other religious groups is having this practice and emphasizing this, that the way they give advices to every personer from their activities, they are showing the defense and the rights and respect for every prisoners, because they are still a human being that should be treated with their dignity. Every human person is created in the image and likeness of God and has an inviolable dignity, value, and worth, regardless of race, gender, class, or other human characteristics. So regardless of your class, of what kind of family you have, we have still the same way or the same process as a human being. We should emphasize the importance of value to each one of us and having dignity and right good attitudes, to emphasize this in the community. It is very important in order for a particular community to be an effective and influencing from other people. Therefore, both the most wounded victim and the most callous criminal retain their humanity. All are created in the image of God and possesses a dignity, value, and worth that must be recognized, promoted, safeguarded, and defended. So all human beings that is created by God should always consider its dignity and its worth to the community as to us human beings live in our society, and that should be promoted by the following safeguard and defended and also protected in order to overcome a successful and efficient way of life. And for this reason, any system of penal justice must provide those necessities that enable inmates to live in dignity. Food, clothing, shelter, personal safety, timely medical care, education, and meaningful work, adequate to the conditions of human dignity. So it is very important to show and provide them, the prisoners, even if they have imprisoned or put into jails, they have to be treated fairly and like a human being and provided with foods and clothing, even if they are inside behind bars. So it is very important in having this kind of bayanihan, because even if that particular person is inside or put into prison, there are still many ways to change that person. And also, it is one way to overcome the effectiveness of what they have called rehabilitation. And in order for that, we human beings, including all of the parts of the government, should be collaborated to face this kind of situations, because it is very important to have this emphasized and adapted to each one of us. So the human dignity is not something we earn by our good behavior. It is something we have as children of God. So human dignity is very important because in this matter, it shows of what kind of person you are, of how you roll to a particular community. That is why we have our parents or guardians to guide us and provide of our needs. They also give us some ideas and thoughts that should be a positive way and a good doing to the community. One example of this, of a family that is having in a poor or very minor or put into a poverty, but still, even if they are in that situation, that particular father of the family is still having his hard work to provide the needs of his family in the right way and proper way. We can still have solutions, find solutions, positive solutions in order to overcome this crisis, even if we are in a poor family. It has to be responsible within ourselves and hardworking because it is very important to gain and put this into ourselves. We believe that because we are all created by God, none of us is the sum of the worst act we have ever committed. That is why we have this, what we call human rights, because each one of us have our rights to be respected and to have our second chances. And in order for this to overcome this particular process, we should always be collaborated and put into unity in order to overcome and result in a positive community lifestyle. As a people of faith, we believe that grace can transform even the most hardened and cruel human beings. That is why some of religious groups and religious organizations are having its activities and seminars inside the prison, some of the prison, in order for them to put advices and positive thoughts to the following prisoners in order for them to have the idea on how they could change and give chances within themselves. So in this matter, some of these activities are having its limitations and considerations, especially to the high-profile inmates, because in this particular violent criminal offender will probably suffer the most very hard punishment because he have done a very violent criminal act that a particular community and the peace of that particular community have broken into pieces. So that is why some of the inmates have isolated and separated, especially to those inmates that are high profile. On the other hand, in having this imprisonment, it should also be the women and men shall be separated because we have different genders. That should have its considerations because the women and women act differently, especially to their physical needs. So it is very important to have this separation in order for the imprisonment to prevent war or conflicts inside the prison. There are also problems inside the prison to those persons who are having its bribe or paying some of the officials in order for them to be treated like a king inside the prison. Yes, it is true. It is still existing even now in Duterte's administration. But in that particular situation, this administration is having its solution to end up this kind of activities. And also, the corruption is present inside the prison. Some of the prisoners have connections with the officials and have these illegal activities even inside the prison. One of the examples is the high official secretary or official in the Department of Justice is Laila de Lima. She became protecting some of the prisoners, especially to those prisoners that are having progressive or came from rich families that put into prison. They are given special treatment, like they can be provided refrigerators and TVs, cell phones, they can have the sofa or bedrooms. It is very alarming and unfair treatment to each one of the prisoners, because if you put into the prison, you should take fair treatment and due process, especially if that particular person have done a violent act, criminal action. So, Miss De Lima have been related to many prisoners, and that is why she also was showed by many evidences that put her into jail also. I hope and we hope that this, by putting this dilemma into jail, is the start of having these illegal activities inside the prison, especially in stopping it and preventing it to happen every now and then. It is very important, and that arrestment is having a big effect in implementing the progressive and effectiveness of having fairness treatment inside the prison. But not only De Lima was the only person included the kind of illegal activities. There are also some, but they are not only mentioned because of confidentiality and in order for them to be unknown to other people, because each one of us, as what I have said, our human rights consideration should be effective and implemented all the time. So victims must have the help of the faith community in recovering their community. So by the help of the community people, in order to gain your dignity, you should be related with them. Join with them of some activities to your community. It is one way of having good relation to your community, and it is also one way in providing an efficient way of living in a society. So to be excluded from the proceedings against their offenders, to be ignored by friends and family, or to be neglected by two community of faith because of their deep pain is unsettling, only serves to further isolate victims and denies their dignity. So it is very important to have this human dignity, especially each one of us. We have to know this kind of attitudes and the way we rule in our community. And in order to end this kind of imprisonment or prevent to be imprisoned, let us think always positive ways. Even if we come to many problems in our life, let us just put it as our challenge in order for us to overcome this and always be positive. There are also many ways in order to prevent this kind of problem. Go with other families, go out with your friends and talk to one another to the problems that comes to your life. It is better to have someone that could be talk about your problems in life in order for you to have a freedom to speak and the right to show your problems or concerns within your life. All of us need this kind of activities in order for us individuals can obtain a positive doings in our personal lives. It is very important to have this kind of attitude to our personal needs, especially to the young ones. They have to be guided and protected by their families and show them how to roll in the community in the proper way and in the right way. Provide everything for them in order for them to do beautiful things in the community. It is very alarming to each one of us in having this kind of problems that more of the prisoners have been put into jail or the person put into jail because of this kind of problems, because they lack of guidance, and in order for this to be treated, we have to talk with them and provide them their seminar or activities. One example for that is having the different orientation and activities for every communities in order to have an effective and progressive community. So all of us are called to stand with the victims in their hurt and in their search for healing and genuine justice. In order to provide genuine justice, we should be united as one family in a particular community in order to overcome a peace and order. So this includes, of course, the children of the incarcerated who themselves are seriously harmed by their parents' misdeeds. On the other hand, all of the government are having another options for the poor and vulnerable. This principle of Catholic social teaching recognizes that every public policy must be assessed by how it will affect the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. So it should be implemented and shown of fair treatment, even if you belong to a vulnerable or in a poor society. Sometimes people who lack adequate resources from early in life, example children, especially those who have been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused, the mentally ill, and people who have suffered discrimination, turn to lives of crime in desperation or out of anger or confusion. So because of being discriminated, some of the person have committed crimes in out of their anger to show their angerness and to the community. So in this particular problem, we should prevent of discriminating other people, because we all know that each one of us have different attitudes and characteristics, and also even in our physical appearances, just like on how we have our fashions and different passions. Also in the matter of children that have been separated with their family, it is very important to guide them and then put them into a rehabilitation center, or the DSWD, because they provide advices and provide their shelter to the children as they grow up and already have this kind of proper mindset and already develop themselves, and shows that development of the way they think and decide for their own good. So this kind of abusive action, even emotionally or mentally, it should be treated or put into an orientation in order to gain some advices from the psychologist or some person that is related with you, that is comfortable, that you feel that you are comfortable with that person. Then it is one way to have this effective and promote in having solution in this kind of abuse action. So unaddressed needs, including proper nutrition, shelter, healthcare, and protection from abuse and neglect, can be stepping stones on a path towards crime. So in this particular problem, because of this lack or inadequate of this proper nutrition, as what I have said, it resulted to poverty that will put you in committing crimes, because you already don't have, or you don't think any other ways to provide your family, and for you to think that in making or having this criminal act is the solution to provide your family. So that is also a major problem in our society today, because there are many Filipino are experiencing poverty because they have lack of family planning, and they have lack of guidance and protected community, because in our country we are overpopulated, and because of this resulted to many crime incidents and criminalities in many public places, especially in Manila, the bigger city. It has many population and many street people that only sleeping under the bridges and putting themselves and having their lives on it. So it is very hard to live in a street because you don't have proper shelter and proper health care, and especially nutrition, because it is very dirty out in the street to live, especially to the children, of the birth of the children. So it is very alarming. Then it should be show or provided solutions. And for me, one way of preventing this to happen or get more Filipino in poverty is to have this family planning, because most of this resulted that most of poor family have this over number of family matters because they are having a high rate number of members of the family because they are lack of family planning. Then our role as church is to continually work to address these needs through pastoral care, charity, and advocacy. So even if these abusive or unaddressed needs, there are still many organizational groups and non-government organizational groups have their different advocacies and charities. These charities are built to provide and help those people who are experiencing serious poverty in order to provide them the proper nutrition, the shelter, the health care, and protection from any abuse. So it is very important to have this kind of institutions or organizations. That is why there are some artists that is having or giving their money to different charities because charities also have its categories. There are charities for the children and also for the old ones, our lolos and lolas. They are having this kind of charity. And well, it should be separated by the young ones and to the older ones for them to have them effectively implement this kind of guidance because being young and being in an old version, it is very hard for these two kinds of human beings will be put in a one room because most of these are having its conflicts because we already have different perspectives in each one of us. So it should be solved and have been this kind of separation. And these charities is very helpful. Also the pastoral care for any religious groups. They are having this way in order to help other people. It is their one way in helping other people. And now, especially to the pandemic that we are experiencing today, our government is facing a very serious crisis that made it very difficult on helping especially the many Filipino people. But because we Filipinos always find ways, so someone or certain organization build these community pantries in order to give and provide some people who experience difficulties in their livelihood in providing them and giving these many kinds of goods and what kind of food or many kinds of way on how they could help people freely. They are just putting it in a public place and let anyone get and also only for what they needed. It is a very right move to do, especially to this crisis, in order for our country to and government to have this crisis slowly solved and make this problem to have its solutions. It is very helpful to this kind of participation in helping the community, providing their needs and wants in order to for them to live a happy and efficient way of living. So let's now proceed to the subsidiarity and solidarity. These two related principles recognize that human dignity and human rights are fostered in community. So both human dignity and human rights should be put or present or fostered in the community. Subsidiarity calls for problem solving. So it is one way of resolving or giving solutions from the problem initially at the community level, family, neighborhood, city, and state. So the process of this problem solving is categorized from the first is from the community, then to your family, then to your neighborhood, then to the city, and to the whole country or state. It is only when problems become too large or the common good is clearly threatened that larger institutions are required to help. These principal solutions or local issue to the next extent possible should have local solutions to each and one neighborhood. Neighborhood watch groups, community-oriented policy, school liaison officers, neighborhood treatment centers, and local support for ex-offenders all can be part of confronting crime and fear of crime in local communities. So this criminal activity is largely a local issue. To the extent possible, should have local solutions. Neighborhood watch groups, community-oriented policing, school liaison officers, and this process have done in order to implement rules to every community, and these are implemented by the help of the barangay officials, the tanods, and some of the private sectors also have provided this kind of local community security in order to implement and having a local support on protecting one's personal life in a certain community. So it is very helpful to have this kind in our country because we know that our country has only this kind of process. Because in US, they don't have barangay officials. They only have mayors. They don't have captains. They don't have councilors. They don't have barangay captains. So it is very amazing to have this kind of governance in our country, that each kind of community have its leaders to implement and provide ordinances in order to put a community in peace and order. So the next is, as what you have seen, is the picture of Pope John Paul II, the pro-life Pope. So this Pope provides or have its contributions important to the institutional corrections. Then, as what he have said, the new evangelization calls for followers of Christ who are unconditionally pro-life, who will proclaim, celebrate, and serve the gospel of life in every situation. A sign of hope is in the increasing recognition that the dignity of human life must ever be taken away, even in the case of someone who has done great evil. I renew the appeal I made for a consensus to end the death penalty, which is both cruel and unnecessary. So Pope John Paul II is remembered for his successful efforts to end communism, as well as for building bridges with people of other faiths and issuing the Catholic Church first apology for its actions during the World War II. He was succeeded by Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. John Paul II was a fierce defender of what he perceived as Christian humanism in the face of the forces of communism, capitalism, and totalitarian atheism. So let's go back to what Pope John Paul II said, that to end this death penalty. So in our country, we are having this, but we are attempting on implementing this death penalty, but because of the human rights policies, it is very difficult to have this kind of policy in our country, because as what John Paul II said, it is cruel and unnecessary, because people who have committed crime or person can still be changed or improve themselves. That is why we have these corrections and rehabilitation centers to obtain and provide them the ways in having its changes within themselves. So Pope Francis, for himself, love was the key and advocated uncompromisingly the need to give human beings the deepest value. And from this flowed everything. John Paul II was the first globally oriented Pope. So among of the Pope, he's only one being oriented as a Pope. And he increased the global prestige of the papacy. His emphasis on religious and national freedom was unprecedented. He also centralized control over Catholic educational institutions and maintained traditional church positions on gender and sexual issues. And because of this Roman Catholic Church, this institution helped to stop and provide in having the death penalty in our country, because they do believe that people or human beings should not be killed or should not experience this death penalty, especially to our country, Philippines, that we are most of the Roman Catholic, and we only believe and we are kind-hearted to give second chances to other people. So we are still a long way from that time when our conscience can be certain of having done everything possible to prevent crime and to control it effectively, so that it no longer does harm, and at the same time to offer to those who commit crimes a way of redeeming themselves and making positive return to society. That is why there is a non-institutional corrections and given probation and parole in order to redeem and reform itself of each one of the prisoners, to give them chances and return positivity to the society where they commit crime. But still, in this process, it is very important to be considered and implemented, because it provides the peaceful and having its order for the community. So if all of this in some way involved in the problem try to develop this line of thought, perhaps humanity as whole could take a great step forward in creating more serene and peaceful society. So John Paul II was the first globally and most hearted Pope, because he have been emphasizing in loving, that in love we can give chances to other persons who have been committed to crime. So many join Pope John Paul II in renewing the strong and principled opposition to the death penalty. We oppose capital punishment not just for what it does to those guilty of horrible crimes, but for how it affects society Moreover, we have alternative means today to protect society from violent people. It is very important to have another ways or options to implement in having a peaceful society. Because especially today, in in adopting this modernization, we have different ways in having or punishment to those people have done violent act to the community. It is very important to have this due process in order for the human rights policies still present during the execution and punishment process of a particular person that could be put into jail. So it is very important to emphasize this kind of solutions and appreciate the government for its having the solutions or ways in order to have this implemented in a proper way despite of its lapses, but we know each one of us could not make things perfectly in life. As we said in our Good Friday to the end death penalty, increasing reliance on the death penalty diminishes as an is a sign of growing disrespect for human life. So death penalty shows disrespect to human life and human dignity and human rights. So we cannot overcome crime by simply executing criminals. It is not only one way to punish criminals. It is not a better way, the death penalty, to provide the criminals of what they have done bad for the community. And now, let us proceed to this Walnut Street Jail. So as what you can see to this picture, it is very old way or part of the antiquity times of this kind of prison. So the Walnut Street Prison was a pioneering effort in prison reform, originally built as a conventional jail. As before the American Revolution, it was expanded in 1790 and held as a model of the enlightened thinking about criminals. The prison, in fact, was known as penitentiary, from the Latin word for remorse. So, it was designed to provide a severe environment that left inmates much time for reflection, but it was also designed to be a cleaner and safer than past prisons. The Walnut Street Jail was one of the forerunners of an entire school of thought on prison construction and reform. The prison was built on Walnut Street in Philadelphia as a city jail in 1773 to alleviate overcrowding in existing city jail. Although designed by Robert Smith, Pennsylvania's most prominent architect, the building was a typical U-shaped building designed to hold groups of prisoners in large rooms. By and large, the role of prison was to incarcerate criminals. So there was little regard for their physical well-being, nor were there any attempts to rehabilitate them. Prisons were overcrowded and dirty, and inmates attacked each other regularly. So that is the result of overcrowding jail or prison. Those who served their sentences came out of prison probably more inclined toward a criminal life than they were before their incarceration. So it was the Quakers of Philadelphia who came up with the concept for what they called a penitentiary, a place where prisoners could reflect on their crime and become truly sorry for what they had done. The Quakers believed that through reflection and repentance, inmates would give up crime and leave prison rehabilitated. So this is the way on how a particular person given a chance in order for him to be rehabilitated and make self-improvements or self-confidence for himself to have regrets of what he have done to that particular crime action he have been committed. Shortly after the American Revolution, a group of Quakers formed the Philadelphia Society for alleviating the miseries of public prisons, whose goal was made clear in its name. So the later group became known as the Pennsylvania Prison Society. So this is the years after the revolution. This group worked to encourage prison reform. So and its efforts finally paid off in 1790 when the Walnut Street Jail became the first state penitentiary in the country. So the main addition to the Walnut Street complex was a new cell block called the Penitentiary House. So there is where the prisoners were rehabilitated and shown their repentance of what they have done or committed crimes in order for them to be rehabilitated and put into an isolated area. So built in the courtyard of existing structure, it included a series of small cells designed to hold individual prisoners. So these cells or the corridors connecting them were designed to prevent prisoners from communicating with each other. So in order for the prisoners to prevent communication or have access to each another, they should be put into a small room or being isolated in order and prevention also for conflicts. Windows were high up. The cells had 9-foot high ceilings and grated and louvered to prevent prisoners from looking onto the street. So in order for the prisoners to get their vision outside the street, it should be put into a high cell to prevent this kind of situations. So each cell had a mattress, a water tap, and a PV pipe. For this, it is made for their personal necessities or personal needs. Inmates were confined to their cells for the guard and then only briefly once a day. They were sometimes allowed to read in their cells, but for the most part, they sat in solitude. So the Quakers saw this solitary confinement not as the very important role in implementing this kind of imprisonment. So the punishment put as a time for reflection and remorse. That was the reason the inmates were not put to work. So labor said penitentiary proponents would preoccupy the inmates and keep them from reflecting on their crimes. So in order for them to prevent committing crimes again, they should always be or put in security and only have its limitation in viewing or have communicating from the normal persons. So the Walnut Prison became in part of the model for what became known as the Pennsylvania system. So this prison designed for philosophy and the concept of the solitary confinement were components of prison life at these institutions. Although some Pennsylvania system prison introduced to the inmates. So this Walnut Street was opened in a small upstate New York town of Otterburn. So as we're not strict, the success or should live despite the good intentions of for the prisoners. So as we have see, this kind of prison is one of the effective and efficient way of how we could build an effective or efficient way of having this kind of prison. It is one way of example to be adapted, especially to our country, but we could not get it fastly because it is very difficult, especially if we don't have enough budget on it. But now our government is having its access or ways to have or build up many more prisons in order to prevent this kind of overcrowding and prevent of having isolated in a one room with many prisoners and make contacts and also communicating to each other. So in general, overall view for my discussion on this video, it is very important to know each of us attitudes and know our dignities, our personal decision should be put in a positive way and in the right way. So as I end this video, I hope that all of you have understand and put into yourself all about the discussions and topics I have discussed to you. I hope you like it and always keep safe and stay at home and do not go outside or go to public places, especially to this crisis that we are facing today. So thank you everyone. Thank you guys.